My name is Darcy, and I'm one of your friendly neighborhood teen librarians who also does 20-somethings programming. Today we're going to be creating a sparkly seed bead bug to wear as a pin. It's a fairly simple sewing project, but it has like tons of room for experimentation or to make it your own. So let's talk about what you'll need. If you've picked up the kit from the main library, then you should have all the supplies you need except for a pair of scissors, and a washable marker is really useful. So if you have the kit, here's what you've got. You have one container of seed beads. So there are two sizes, probably a few sizes in here, honestly. It's just kind of a hodgepodge, but there are mostly small ones and then a few larger ones that you can kind of use for accents. You will have one piece of felt. They are mostly light colored to make it easier to see your marking pen if you decide to use one. You will have one needle, so that's what's in this little packet here. These are sharp, so be very careful. Be careful. They're also small enough that a seed bead should be able to go, you should be able to string beads with them, which is part of the whole point. So the little packet opens up and then flips open, and there is your needle. Please don't drop it. These can get lost really easily in carpeting. If you do drop it on the ground, I would recommend either grabbing a magnet immediately and trying to find it that way, or if you don't have a magnet, you can like shine a light and they will reflect. So try not to lose your needle. You've also got a bit of wire, just a little bit of gold thin wire. You've got a bit of thread. That's what this guy is. Both of your tails have been taped together. I would recommend unraveling the one that's wrapped around to use your thread for ease. You've got a pin back of some size. You have a little baggie of some long, thin tube beads for wing accent if you choose to go with a winged bug. You've got a plate, and you've got two little bug pattern pieces. You don't have to use these at all. They're just kind of a template suggestion. And that should be what you've got. If you didn't pick up the kit for some reason, or you couldn't, or you're coming to this later, you can absolutely buy all of these things at a craft store or a hobby store. All right, so before we get into the creepy crawlies, we're gonna do a quick covering of hand sewing basics. So if you know how to sew, if you know how to hand stitch, you can kind of fast forward to this part or hang out and see if you learn something different. But generally, sewing is used to bind things together, usually cloth to cloth or something to cloth like we're doing today. You can think of sewing like lacing up your shoes, except before you do the lacing with your thread, you use a tiny sword to poke holes in your shoe for the laces. All right, so the very first step to sewing is threading your needle. If you have never handled a needle before, they are usually very small and very sharp. Be careful, because you can definitely stab yourself. So with a needle, you've got the pointy stabby end. Well, both ends are kind of pointy, but one of them is definitely sharper than the other. And then the other end, you have an eye. I don't know if you can see it on this needle. I'll put up a little graphic here. But basically, the eye is just a hole in the end of your needle that you can put a thread through. It is very small, so if this is your first time threading a needle, it might take you a few tries, and that's totally okay. But before we get with the needle, we're going to take our thread, and I'm going to snip open our little packet here. Snip. That can go away. All right, so I'm going to unravel, find my end that is wrapped around the bundle. Just unravel it. Now you want to keep your thread pretty tidy because it's easy to get knotted. So try and keep it in a good shape so it doesn't get all tangled up and knotted. All right, so we're gonna get a piece of thread that's not too long. So I tend to go with like, I don't know, 1.5 feet maybe. If you're feeling ambitious, you can do like your one full spread arm. But all right, so once you've got a little bit of thread, you're gonna wanna snip it and get a nice clean cut. You want that fresh cut to try and thread your needle with. So that's how I do it. Hold your needle, hold your thread with just a little bit sticking out, and go for it. Maybe. So you can get just like the tiniest little bit in there if you can get even a tiny bit started. You can very carefully and grab that little niblet, ha! And pull it through. Snap, that might be the first time I've threaded a needle on the first try. All right, so now you have a piece of string very carefully tucked through a needle that is absolutely going to pull out the second you start pulling on that thread. So what I do, and this might be bad form, embroidery people, is tie one small knot right at the eye of the needle. That's on there, you know, okay, it's going to stick around for a little bit at least. You have threaded a needle. It may have taken you 30 minutes. It may have taken you 3 days. It's not a problem. Needles are complicated and terrible. As long as you get there, you're good. So before we start sewing, we are going to have to tie a knot in the other end, right? So this is how I do it. Grab here, tuck in, you get one tiny knot, put your fingers on that knot and hold it tight, and then do it again. And you just, when you pull, you try and get your knots to sit right on top of each other. You're going to want a couple. There we go. All right, that big chunkier of a knot is probably good to go. And voila, a needle and thread ready for mischief. So the sewing we're going to do today is fairly simple. It is generally called a running stitch. A running stitch is not complicated at all. It is going up through the fabric and then pulling your thread through and then going back down. So it will look like this. Now we're not going to be doing exactly a running stitch. We're going to be modifying it by adding a bead. So the bead, you go up through the fabric, slip a bead on your needle, and then you go back down through the fabric, and that adheres the bead to the top of the fabric without making it too complicated. So we are going to kind of squish our beads up really close, our stitches up really close to each other. We might even like go backwards over some stitch area just to make sure our beads really fill in the space of the fabric, because we want our beaded bug to look jeweled and fancy with many tiny beads all over it and not much fabric showing at all. So that is what we are going to do before we get started. Just stitching on some beads, we're going to pick out our bug. So in my example here, I used this little winged guy, which is pretty cute, but I think I'm going to make this weird little beetle this time. So you can use your templates if you want. You can cut them out and then trace them on your fabric, but I'm probably just going to freehand it a little bit. Living wild and free. So I added the antennas and the legs, but those are not going to be stitched directly onto the fabric because we're going to cut the bug out completely, and then we'll try and use our wire for those bits. So that'll come right at the end. So we're just going to do the body of the bug. That's going to be our bug. It is going to be easy, quick. I'm going to trim out, not super close to the fabric, but just a little bit to make it easier to handle. So there's tons of felt left over. You'll probably have tons of beads left over. So if you want to make a couple of bugs, go to town. If you want to make a totally different bug, oh man, the world is your bug oyster. Do whatever you please. Make any kinds of bugs that suit your fancy. It is your beaded bug kit. Okay, so I'm going to open this pack of beads. Be careful with your seed beads. If they fall, it will be a nightmare to clean them up. I am speaking from very sad experience. And I'm going to dump them out into this so I can kind of see what I've got. I'll probably use these big green guys to maybe fill in this top area and maybe do this line in the middle. Maybe I'll just use straight green. I don't know. We'll see what I feel like. But for now, we're going to start with our first bead. So I'm going to walk you through one or two, and then we're going to go into fast forward mode. It's going to be really exciting. All right, I like to leave my pattern on the top of my bug so that it's easier to see when I'm pulling back through. So this first stab is kind of a shot in the dark. You like kind of fold your fabric over and see. Yeah, it's not exactly where I want to start. How about there? Yes, that's where I want to start. So I've got my knot tucked away back there. I've got my thread completely pulled through, so I'm going to put my first bead on there. I think we're going to go with this lovely dark green big boy. So I thread them on, and then when I decide where I want to go back down, I want them to be pretty tight together. So I'm going to pick a spot just a little bit further down that line, but closer than the size of the bead, right? So the seed beads, it's less important for this part. You can always put them on top of each other. I'm gonna pull it all the way through. Ooh, I heard somebody fussing there. And voila, one adorable little bead tucked right on there. So it's pretty simple. And now I'm on the back again, so I'm ready to come back up. So I'm gonna pitch up, shoot up, right about where I want the next one to go. And it's okay if you get this wrong. If you can, like if you go up in a spot you really don't want to, you can try and go back down in the same spot. If you get it exactly right, it'll pull your thread back through. Haha, nice. We're gonna find another big green bead, stick them on there, and we're just gonna go to town, really. All right, so that is our top little section done. This is something called cheating, where you, not actually, where you thread a whole bunch of beads on your string at once. So you get a whole bunch of beads, fill it in, kind of figure out if it's the right size for what you want to do. This one seems about the right length. And you stitch it down. So like it's one giant bead. It is not. It is many beads, but like it is one giant bead. And then you can go through and kind of tack that into place. So that's what I'm going to do here. All right, so I'm going to start on filling in my little wing bits. So I think I'm actually going to use clears. We've got lots of them. They're in a bunch of different kind of light shades. So I might throw a yellow or two in there, or maybe a white. Okay, so I am almost out of thread. So here's what I like to do to start a new thread. I tuck it through the back. I tuck it through again, so I'm going down just like I normally would, but instead of going like down, I'm going kind of sideways. So it cuts through the fabric twice and then pulling through all the way. So I kind of do that a couple of times. I generally don't knot it off. I will do that and then snip really close to where my knot is, but leave this thread hanging for now, and I'm going to tie my next thread to it. So I'm going to stick our needle someplace safe, get our thread back, figure out where our thread starts, haha, and then get another goodly piece. So like I said, I don't know, 1.5 feet, maybe longer than that if you're feeling feisty, but not super duper long. And then we get to thread a needle again. Then we're just going to see where we want to get started. I'm going to start back at that top row again, right there. All right, so that is one side completely done. I went and filled some bits. I added another green on the bottom. So now I'm gonna start on the other wing. Hello again, friends. We are back after some minor catastrophic filming. So let's do a quick recap. So we stitched the beads all over our bug. We tied down all of our strings on the back. We carefully trimmed around the edge of the felt, not catching any of our thread pull-throughs anywhere. We snipped our very thin wire into pieces so that we could run our antenna. It can be sewn just like you're using a needle as long as you're careful because that wire is pretty sharp. So we did our antennas with no beads on them and just kind of crimped the tips so they're not stabby. And then for each of our sets of legs, which we are still in the midst of, we did one long piece for legs on the leg on either side. So you thread it through one side, don't crimp it. Carefully thread it through the other side, also don't crimp it. Put your beads on one side and then do a little wiggly bit. And then do the beads on the other side, the wiggly bits so they won't escape. And then I did all of my legs first. So I went ahead and finished this guy off, these two back legs off. The finishing on the legs is a little tricky. So you let all of your beads on one side fall fully to the end, and you get your wire all threaded up again so it's nice and sharp. So you're going to take skip that first end bead, curl your wire around, and thread the wire through the second to last bead on your row until you've got it sticking out. So that means you've got one bead trapped on the end here, and you're double threaded through the second bead. You're going to hold on this wire so you don't disrupt your other end so badly, and pull all the way through. And make it nice and snug there on that end bead. Now you can snip the end of this little wire. Remember, you didn't hear it. When you're cutting your wire, this is a very fine wire. You can use just regular scissors, but if they're really, really nice scissors, you might blunt them a little bit, so be careful. All right, and then you're going to want to tuck that leg in tight. You want it to be close to the end. Again, if you have super glue, this is a great time. You can super glue this second to last bead on there. Same with the antennas. So the antennas will wiggle around if you don't super glue it down. You can put a little blob of super glue right on the spot where the wire shows through on the back, and it should hold your antennas in place. All right, so the other side of the leg, this is the extra tricky part. All right, you straighten out your wiggly bit, you pull it fairly tight, but not so tight it's going to pop the other side. And then you do the same thing, skip that first bead and thread it through our second. I'm going to hold it here, pull it tight as I dare, which is about that much apparently. Trim off this little bit, and now straighten that out. See if I can get the other beads to behave. I'm going to pull in my center where I've got this kind of slack. I'm just going to kind of tuck it there. So the easy bit with this, or what makes it really work, is that we're going to stitch down this spare wire here so our legs are really tight to the body and so they don't go wiggling around too much when we sew the pin back on, which is going to be our last step. So finish off your next two legs. Okay, so all of our legs are set in some kind of formation. So now, look at how cute he is. We're just going to sew on the pin back, and then we will basically be done. So thread your needle once more. Threaded needle, ready to rock. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is not punch all the way through to the beaded side. I'm going to slide, so in, and then leverage yourself up. That'll give us our first spot. And now I'm going to make this wire sit where I want it to sit. Just like you can kind of finesse the beads with little stitches to decide where they're gonna go, you can finesse your wire. So make sure you tack down each of the legs a couple of times, but don't catch. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew the back of my pin on. All right, so with your pin back, it is a little spiral one. I like to have the clasp at the bottom, so I will probably wear this pin face up. I'm going to open it up just to make it easier, though beware, you're more likely to get stabbed this way. You can absolutely sew them on when they're closed. And with my thread already started, I'm just going to set the pin on top, kind of hold it down carefully, and go through one of those holes. And again, avoid the legs, please, no more leg attacks. And then carefully pull it through. So that first stitch kind of starts to anchor it in place, and then you just keep going until you're sure it's not going to be moving around on you. You can go up through the beads if you want, and back down if that's easier. Just make sure you go around any beads instead of make sure your thread's not obviously showing.